Cahokia Mounds, ancient metropolis. Emerging from the mist of centuries, they stand as sentinels of the past, of a lost civilization. But 1,000 years ago, these mounds stood at the heart of a great city, one which was, at its time, the most powerful city in America. Today we call it Cahokia. Located just across the Mississippi River from present-day St. Louis, this was the metropolis of ancient America, the largest city in the United States before it was the United States. While Europe was mired in the Dark Ages, the people of the Mississippian culture were making rapid cultural and scientific advancements. Cahokia was a city of thousands of people, but it also was a city of grand monuments. This civilization created some of the largest earthworks in the ancient world. Their trade networks extended over much of the continent. It was a center of art, commerce, power, and wealth. But who were these people? They obviously had an advanced society, organized on a massive scale, and capable of both immense engineering works and refined artistic expression. The fate of this great city and its occupants is not clear, but the legacy they have left behind is an intriguing and fascinating look into the past. William Eismenger has been studying Cahokia for more than 2 decades. 2 of the greatest cities of the Midwest are separated only by a few miles and 1,000 years of time.
Never ceases to sort of give me an unusual feeling every time I climb to the top of Monk's Mound and think about what might have been here. I have no doubt that Cahokia was the most unique Indian settlement that ever existed here on the North American continent, north of Mexico at least.
How did Cahokia emerge as this ancient metropolis? Where did these people come from?
Coming over and into the valley, the trail rises into a meadow where a lightning burn is healing. On the far side, the land falls away through the spruce. Straight ahead is sky, the sky over the great valley. There is a sweet exhilaration in coming to the summit of a pass where the brightness ahead shines through the last dark band of trees. The weight of a pack sack lightens. The hard part is done. The possible opens before us. 18th century pioneers passing over the Appalachians into the Ohio Valley wrote often of this feeling of being freed, of encumbrances, of fresh beginnings, judging from what they said and from what has been said of them subsequently. Most of them shared the misconception that they were entering an ample emptiness intended to be theirs alone. All right? Listen to what he's saying. This wasn't yours, there was people here. And again, remember, these pioneers are not all so-called white people, okay? Let's not forget all the history. In fact, they carried more baggage than they knew. Only a few were able to cast off their preconceptions. And only after much bloodshed, the western vastness was not empty. Several 100,000 people was already there and determined to resist invasion. Nor was it without its own history, as the Europeans slowly acknowledged after encountering profusion of very large ruined buildings. Whatever may have been the Edenic expectations of the newcomers, it became obvious that the Indians of the valley were the survivors of much larger populations. This book's called Hidden Cities: The Discovery and Loss of Ancient North American Civilization. Roger G. Kennedy. Okay? And it says, the world of the first Americans was richer, greater, more wondrous by far than most of us have ever imagined or than most histories have ever even implied. Few realize that some of the oldest, largest, and most complex structures of ancient archaeology were built of earth, clay, and stone right here in America, in the Ohio and Mississippi valleys. Ohio, the start of it all. Gonna have a future video on Ohio. From 6,000 years ago until quite recently, North America was home to some of the most highly advanced and well-organized civilizations in the world, complete with cities, roads, and commerce. From the lost city of Balbacha near New Orleans to the Great Hopewell Road, a causeway for religious pilgrims along the Ohio River in the 13th century. This is way before Europeans came, supposedly, right? A pilgrimage causeway along the Ohio River, 13th century, 1200s, okay? That's the 1200s. These cultures built hundreds of thousands of structures, of which a small but tantalizing portion still remain. Like the Druids of Salisbury Plain, they patterned extraordinarily precise geometry according to the rising and setting of the moon. Like the ancient Egyptians, they organized millions of hours of human labor to construct pyramids, platforms, and plazas. So here's a picture of Roger G. Kennedy, pretty important guy, actually, when I was doing research about him. I'm going to read to you a little bit what it says here. It says, and remember, this is the author, right? So he's the director of the National Park Services. He was basically under Bill Clinton. That was his job under Bill Clinton's administration, and is the former director of the American History Museum, all right, director at the Smithsonian Institution, okay? He is the author of Rediscovering America, 1990, and Orders from France, the Americans and French in a Revolutionary World, okay? He's also saying he was a polymath whose career included banking, television production, historical writing, and museum administration, the last as the director of the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of American History. This is the guy who wrote this book we're about to read. He's about to tell us he's about to drop some bombs on everybody. And it's not the first time we hear about him. We actually have shown him in a documentary video. We're going to show that real quick, right now, real quick, a little segment of it.
While serving as the director of the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History, historian Roger Kennedy was shocked to learn, for the first time, that massive ancient city remains existed in North America.
Very, very few of us were conscious of the immensity of a place like Monk's Mound at Cahokia, opposite St. Louis, which is bigger in its footprint than the Great Pyramid at Giza. We didn't know that.
Most Americans have no idea that ancient cities with advanced architectures once dotted the ancient North American landscape. Director Kennedy has since coined a name for such places.
What I call hidden cities. I use the term because these were very big places. There were more people, we now know, in Cahokia, across from St. Louis, than there were in London or Rome.
Many Indian cultures have left little more than footprints behind. But one culture was to leave a dramatic and unique mark on the land. Around 1000 BC, a people we call the Woodland culture was developing throughout most of eastern North America, appearing near Cahokia around 600 BC. Over a period of 1400 years, these people developed agriculture and became increasingly tied to the land. Populations increased, technical advancements flourished, and social life, ceremonies, and rituals became more elaborate. Mounds are the most obvious signature of the Woodland people, but mounds take many forms. Most were conical burial mounds, some steep-sided and up to 50 feet high. As well, these ancient engineers built long ridge-top mounds, earthen embankments, moat-like trenches, and magnificent geometric earthworks. But there's more. After the year 500, effigy mounds in the shape of animals were also constructed. The fundamental question remains, why build mounds? Most effigy mounds could only be fully seen and appreciated from the air. One, the Great Serpent Mound in Ohio, takes the form of a huge snake almost a quarter-mile long. In almost all cases, the mound builders were very precise and detailed in their work, creating complex monuments and large-scale replicas of animal forms. In fact, mound building would become an obsession in eastern North America for centuries to come. Construction took place in river valleys, on bluffs, and in some cases, fortress-like earthen walls enclosed hilltops. Perhaps for defensive purposes, perhaps for ceremony. We simply don't know.
"100 miles to the west, near Newark, Ohio, lies a vast center of Hopewell culture, Mound Builders State Memorial, all that remains of the largest complex of earthen construction anywhere in the world. Visitors first entering the grounds are not greatly impressed. They see only a few lines of raised earth and a number of small, natural-looking hillocks overgrown with mature trees. But slowly a grand pattern emerges, a vast sweep of temple mounds, octagon and circular enclosures, and long avenues once covering 4 square miles on the banks of the Licking River. And the great circle earthworks are only a small fraction of the Newark earthworks still preserved on public land. Most has long since been plowed level by farmers and homesteaders.
We return now to the book Hidden Cities, The Discovery and Laws of Ancient North American Civilization by Roger G. Kennedy. Earlier we were in the introduction again, and we were talking about how the Indians of the valley were the survivors of much larger populations, even along the headwaters of the Ohio, on the banks of mountain brooks. There were signs of ancient habitation in the form of small burial mounds. As the streams grew larger, so did the buildings on their banks. Below Pittsburgh, at Grave Creek in what is now West Virginia, a conical mound is still today 2,700 feet, 251 meters in circumference, and 70 feet, 21 meters tall. It was built by Indians while Rome was young. While Rome was young, huh? What if Rome was over here? Scores of structures almost equal to its bulk still remained, offering the commentary of the elders upon the coal dumps and slag heaps of the rust belt as the flares of disconsolate gasworks flicker where beacon fires once blazed. In the Ohio and Mississippi valleys, tens of thousands of structures were built between 6 and 66 centuries ago. 66 centuries ago. All right. They might be even way older than that. That's what their dates they give them, based on their radiocarbon dates, right? Again, but in the Ohio, Mississippi Valley, tens of thousands of structures, all right? tens of thousands of structures, some as large as 25 miles in extent. 25 miles? Do you hear that? 25 miles in extent required over 3 million person hours of labor. A lot of people to work that, or maybe not. Maybe they had a smarter way to do it than just through massive labor of many people, like they show us, how they built the pyramid supposedly. And we've gone over some great books that corroborate with what we're reading right now, from the Smithsonian's director, okay? Sometimes even so late as now, one of us may have experience as unexpected and full of wonder as those of the first French trappers and British traders when they came among these structures. In the summer of 1991, I was in a cave searching beneath Indiana for a source of a white mineral called aragonite, which was much favored for sculpture by the Ohio Valley Indians of the 3rd and 4th centuries. I had passed through a succession of caverns and slippery, narrow passageways. There had been no graffiti for half a mile, and I permitted myself the proud thought that I was the first of my species to come there. Then my heat lamp showed on the floor the twisted fibers of the butt end of a torch, and there were sandal marks in the dust. I was late by a millennium and a half. This discovery should not have come as a surprise to me. But though I have been writing American history for nearly 50 years, it was. Others know about the cave, and as the graffiti, some more than a century old, demonstrate, all the knowers were not scholars. But as I talked with friends about the probability that Indians were seeking stone for sculpture in Indiana caves, while the Emperor Augustus was losing legions in the German forest, I found that I was not alone in my ignorance of America's ancient past. He's realizing, he's like, wow, what is all this stuff I'm finding? He had access. Remember, this is an important dude, whatever his connections were. He had a lot of titles. Again, a polymath. What is a polymath? It says that a polymath is an individual whose knowledge spans a substantial number of subjects, known to draw on complex bodies of knowledge to solve specific problems. So, Von Woven defined polymathy as knowledge of various matters drawn from all kinds of studies, ranging freely through all the fields of disciplines as far as the human mind. All right, so this is the kind of guy that's writing this. So he's admitting that he was ignorant on America's ancient past.
Know that by far the largest and most impressive earthworks were built here at Cahokia, in a setting which was in many respects ideal. Cahokia is near the confluence of the Mississippi, Missouri, and Illinois rivers. It is in the center of an expansive and fertile floodplain, today known as the American Bottom. The rivers, lakes, sloughs, and marshes provided habitats for many species of fish, waterfowl, and aquatic plants. These extensive waterways were actually highways, giving access to distant hunting grounds. The rivers were also trade routes, where goods were exchanged and ideas flowed as steadily as the waters. The forested Ozark Mountains to the southwest offered important minerals and rocks, like chert for making tools. The prairie to the north provided a seemingly endless expanse of tall grasses, useful for thatching homes and other structures. The woodlands were rich in nuts and berries, and in animal life, turkey, squirrel, and deer. The forests also provided oak, hickory, and other hardwoods for canoes, bowls, bows and arrows, building materials, and of course, fires. And the Mississippi Valley itself gave the Indian peoples not only its incredibly rich soil, but also fish, ducks, geese, and other migratory waterfowl. By 800, the Mayans had declined in Central America, and Europe was in the midst of the Dark Ages. But in the heartland of North America, conditions were now right for the flowering of a great civilization. Out of the woodland culture, Another more highly advanced people were to emerge, the Mississippians, and Cahokia was their crowning achievement. For several hundred years, it was the major center of a culture that spread across Central and Southeastern North America. It was during this Mississippian period that Cahokia developed, prospered, and eventually declined. Today, we build monuments to our civilization, such as skyscrapers and the St. Louis Gateway Arch. But 1,000 years ago, the ancient Mississippians were also building monuments, not of glass and steel, but of earth. The most dramatic monuments of Cahokia are those that survive today, the mounds. Investigations suggest that the placement of the mounds is not random. Dr. Melvin Fowler.
Well, sometimes people get the impression from that this was just something that grew up just by accident, but it appears that there was much more careful planning than that. The idea of the central community with the great plaza with the biggest mound at the site was planned real early on, and then the growth of some of these sub-communities around was a little later, but I think, once again, their locations and their relationships to the central plaza were also very, very carefully thought out.
From 900 to 1400, the Cahokians constructed more than 120 earthen mounds, moving over 55 million cubic feet of earth. They built 3 types of mounds. The most common were the rectangular platform mounds, whose flat top served as a base for ceremonial buildings and residences of the powerful. 2 other mound types are also found at Cahokia: conical and ridgetop mounds. These were apparently used for the burials of important people and as markers of significant locations. Nearly all of the mounds excavated at Cahokia were built in stages, appearing to have been enlarged or modified over time. Quite often, structures were erected on top of platform mounds. Archaeological excavations suggest that these buildings were temples, dwellings of the elite, council lodges, and charnel houses used in burial ceremonies. Piercing Cahokia's horizon is Monk's Mound. As high as a 10-story building, it is easily the most massive work of the mound builders, and is prehistory's equivalent of a skyscraper. Situated in the middle of the city, this is the largest prehistoric earthen structure in the Western Hemisphere. Cahokia's leader conducted ceremonies and governed the city from atop this massive man-made mountain. A platform mound, it covers over 14 acres and rises in 4 terraces to a height of 100 feet. Atop it was constructed an impressive structure, 105 feet long, 48 feet wide, and perhaps 50 feet high.
All right, now we're going to take a look at this book, these writings. The book is called The Mound Builders, Their Works and Relics by Stephen D. Peet, Ph.D. It says member of an antiquarian society, the American Antiquarian Society, American Oriental Society, fellow of American Association of Advanced Sciences, member of Victoria Institute, also of Société d'Ethnographie, core member of Numismatic Society of New York, Historical Societies of Virginia, Wisconsin, Rhode Island, Davenport, Academy of Sciences, also editor of American Antiquarian and Oriental Journal. This was written in Chicago again in the office of the American Antiquarian in 1892. Some 40 years ago, it was held that the Mississippi Valley must have been settled by a civilized people who had migrated from some historic country. Silver swords, scabbards, iron knives, Hebrew inscriptions, all right, Hebrew inscriptions, triune vases, and other curious relics were dwelt upon as proving this. All right, so Hebrew inscriptions, right? All right, let's just belly flop to another part. All right, now it says here, right? This is chapter 1, right? I just wanted to point this out right away, but they're letting you know. Remember his credentials, right? It says the Mound Builders, chapter 1, right? The mysterious races, the mysterious, you're mysterious. My story, not his story, right? Now you're mysterious because it's your story. America is called the New World, and so it is, for it is newly discovered. Our claim, however, is that America is also an old world, all right? It's also not an old world, it is the true old world. It is the old world, not also an old world. Dodge the hijack, ain't nothing over there on that other side old. It's recent and compares well with other countries in this respect. All right, letting you know right away in chapter 1, right? The Mound Builders, right? The guy, you saw his credentials. We invite our readers into the field of American antiquities and will call attention to the prehistoric tokens and remains which are so numerous. So numerous, so many prehistoric tokens here and remains. We are all well assured that there are many things which will interest them and that much may be learned from the study of American archaeology. All right, continue. Now look what he says here. This is almost, I just skipped this paragraph, not there. So it says, to illustrate, listen to this. Egypt has a history which extends far back into the remote past. But what occurred before history is unknown. They don't know how it started. It's what I've always been trying to tell you, right? They don't tell you how it started. All right, it's unknown. All right, the same may be said of Chaldea, unknown, Babylon, unknown, Assyria, unknown. We know who Assur is, right? Who the son of Assur is, and India, right? Unknown, right? The history of these countries is carried back constantly by a new discovery, so they're always rewriting their history, right? Because they never knew fully, making up things here. Nevertheless, deeper obscurity has come upon prehistoric times. It was the ambition of these eastern races to be considered very ancient, but the fabulous dates have been disproved. All right, they give themselves all these crazy dates, but that's been disproved. It was debunked. You don't go that far back, and that's what we're doing today. All right, those places over there are recent. What we talking about? 1700s, 1800s? We're talking about the building of the pyramids. Dig on that. All right, these fabulous dates have been disproved, and yet the mystery still remains. China is supposed to have had a history which reached back hundreds of thousands of years. Such extreme antiquity is denied to China, sorry. But her earliest history is acknowledged to be uncertain and obscure. Greece has had a more modern beginning, but even in Greece, history was preceded by mythology, and that mythology is dim and shadowy. Because who are they talking about when they're talking their mythology in Greece? We've gone over this a lot, right? When we're talking about Atlantis, when we're talking about the Amazonians, when we're talking about Atlas and all these gods, Poseidon, we're talking about over here in America, right? So their prehistory is what he's saying is all mythology. They can't prove it. You understand? There is no beginning for the Greeks because they carried that from here. And that mythology is dim and shadowy. The early history of Rome is perhaps better known, but a mysterious people is supposed to have occupied Italy before the Latins migrated from the east, okay? In Scandinavia, we find the story of the Sea Kings. These figures conspicuously as the earliest heroes, but other people dwelled there long before the Sea Kings. In Great Britain, there was also mysterious races. We go back of the Norman conquest to find the Celts and Saxons, and go back to the Celts and Saxons to find the Britons and the Backs, who were comparatively modern. We read the story of King Arthur and his Round Table and the tales of Druids as marking the earliest period of history, but we find the prehistoric people of Great Britain preceding all. The same may be said of the continent of Europe. We go back to the days of messengers and to the earliest traditionary periods. But long before these, there were races in Europe. In America, also, there were mysterious races. All right, there you go again, mysterious. You're mysterious. Here, the one great event of history was the landing of Columbus. So he's saying that was the greatest event of history, right? So their history, right? Who's telling the story? His story, right? His story. His story. That was their greatest achievement, to be able to come here and conquer your ancestors and take all the riches and come to the terrestrial paradise and set up shop, right? That was their greatest event in history. It is, however, a very modern event. But that just happened. The prehistoric period in America was much more ancient and prolonged than the historic, and yet there is great obscurity over the entire period. We have set before us the subject of this chapter, the mysterious races, especially those found in America. We are to take the monuments and the relics as an evidence that such races have existed. All right, the evidence that's coming out of the mounds. He's saying we're going to show you. We can't put certain things aside with what they're finding, right? What he's finding, he already knows. Again, he told you in the beginning, this is also an old world. This is the true old world. All right. But we are to study these as our special source of information. We call them the prehistoric races, all right, antediluvians, and yet may treat them as though they were historic, all right? He's saying, even though they're prehistoric races, they are historic, they were real, they exist, all right? This ain't no myth like in the other places, it's all a myth, right? Egypt, then you got, who's the creators? Thoth, Osiris, all gods, it's all mythology, Greeks too. It's all myths and stuff for them. Right here, he's saying you can find the prehistoric races, but actually treat them as historic.
Archaeology in the United States began because of a mystery. Who built the hundreds of strange earthen mounds scattered over a half-dozen states between the Mississippi River and the Appalachian Mountains? Today we know it was the ancestors of Native American tribes whose cultures flourished at the same time as those of the Toltec and the Maya in Mexico. Our pioneer forebears, however, believed their Indian enemies were too primitive for such accomplishment. They felt the mounds were the work of a lost race, wiped out long ago by bloodthirsty savages. As settlers pushed westward, some of the first spectacular mounds encountered were at Grave Creek, now part of the city of Moundsville, West Virginia, just south of Wheeling. The Grave Creek Mound, grandest of dozens which once dotted the area, was built by the Adena people about 2,000 years ago. Excavated in 1838, the mound revealed 2 log tombs with human burials and grave offerings of pottery, metal, and stone. The Adena, like many other cultures around the world, created special high places to preserve their most honored dead. Unlike the Maya and the Egyptians, their temple sites, tombs, and monuments were not of stone, but of earth. Today, visitors may climb to the 69-foot summit of the Grave Creek Mound on a modern staircase. The Hopewell earthworks were left us by a Middle Woodland culture of wide influence, centered in southern Ohio and Illinois. Their great ceremonial patterns are evidence of a strong centralized control over thousands of individuals, if not by government as we know it, at least by accepted custom and religious belief. Such earthworks are believed to have been the sites of great gatherings for ceremonies, feasts, contests of skill and trade, similar to gatherings of Native Americans of whom we have a historical record. The gullies beside most of the mounds, once thought to have been moats, are simply the trenches from which earth was taken and piled up nearby. The names Hopewell, Adena, and Mound are in common use in southern Ohio, appearing on street signs and in the names of local companies. At Mound City, near Chillicothe, Ohio, some 40 miles south of Columbus, lies a National Historic Park devoted to preserving and explaining the Hopewell culture. Showpiece of the park is a 13-acre necropolis or graveyard, originally containing 23 burial mounds and covered charnel houses within a rectangular earthen border. In addition to cremations and flexed and extended burials, the mounds contained thousands of shell beads, great quantities of mirror-like mica sheets, copper headdresses, hundreds of carved stone pipes, and knives and spear points of obsidian and flint. This mound, cut into a cross-section for public viewing, was first excavated in 1921. The burial mounds were carefully heaped up over cremation pits and grave sites to protect them from disturbance. When one site reached capacity, it was covered over, mounded in alternating layers of earth, sand, and gravel, and another site begun. In the largest of the 23 mounds here, along with 13 burials and falcon effigies of beaten copper, archaeologists found fragments of human skull, cut, scraped, and drilled to form what they believed to have been a death mask worn by a shaman during the funeral ceremonies. The charnel houses, before being intentionally demolished and covered by mounds of earth, were true houses built on roughly the same plan as the Hopewell dwellings. Here, where a mound has been completely removed, archaeologists have placed round markers to show the pattern of original post holes, evidenced by traces of rotted wood in the earth. Double-posted side walls, slanting outward, supported a roof of thatch and bark with a single smoke hole in the center. These mounds were built over a period of about 500 years, twice as long as the United States has existed, and they illuminate only one aspect of Hopewell life, their treatment of the dead.
Mound construction is not simply the process of piling up earth. Cahokia's ancient engineers used soil of varying textures to build different parts of the mound in order to provide proper drainage and structural integrity. Platform mounds that may have held charnel houses were sometimes paired with conical burial mounds. The 6 known ridgetop mounds at Cahokia are especially intriguing because their full purpose is unknown. 3 are known to contain burials. They also vary greatly in size. Rattlesnake Mound is the largest ridgetop, measuring nearly 500 feet in length. Powell Mound was the second largest, before its destruction by farmers in 1931 for fill dirt. Unfortunately, a combination of natural erosion and modern farming activities has diminished the size and changed the shape of many mounds, in some cases rendering them unrecognizable as man-made structures. Many have been completely lost to the bulldozer and the plow. Today, fewer than 80 mounds remain at Cahokia. The building of these mounds consumed vast quantities of time, energy, and materials. The huge amounts of earth removed for their construction created depressions, today referred to as borrow pits. These filled with rain and groundwater and became swamps and ponds. Some may have even been used as fish farms. Cahokia was a true city, and buildings covered its landscape. By far the most common buildings at Cahokia were single-family dwellings. These homes had special areas for making tools, preparing food, storage, and sleeping. The Cahokians erected a large number of structures for communal purposes. These included council lodges and open-air summer houses, both used for neighborhood meetings, elevated granaries and other food storage buildings, and sauna-like sweat lodges where people, mostly men, went to purify their bodies and spirits. The most impressive buildings at Cahokia were the temples of religion and government. The 5,000 square foot home of the great chief atop Monk's Mound was large even by today's standards. The Mississippians were accomplished and prolific builders. Among their most intriguing works were the astronomical sun calendars, or woodhenges. Like England's Stonehenge, the American woodhenge served as a giant computer to keep track of the seasons, the solar equinoxes, and the solstices. Enormous cedar posts once served as markers, as points on the compass to track the movement of the sun and possibly the moon and stars. Recently, some archaeologists have also looked at woodhenge as an alignment device, used in determining the placement of certain mounds and other landmarks at Cahokia. Excavations have revealed at least 5 circles in roughly the same location, some with a center marker, each slightly larger than the last, and each with an additional 12 poles. Why the increasing number? Maybe the Cahokians were refining their calendar. The real answer remains a mystery. A fire pit was located near one winter solstice pole. Fires may have burned here to encourage the sun's return from the south to re-warm and rejuvenate the earth for another annual cycle. A ceramic vessel recovered at the solstice pole is decorated with symbols of the sun and may have been used during the solstice ceremonies. We now know that Cahokia was a fortified city. Surrounding the heart of this ancient metropolis was an impenetrable 2-mile-long stockade. The mysteries of Cahokia have been uncovered in many ways. Some clues to the puzzle were not visible on the ground. Early aerial photographs taken of fields near Monk's Mound in 1922 revealed light linear streaks that might have been soil disturbances from an ancient wall. Excavations confirmed what the photographs suggested. However, it was not just one wall, but a series of 4 enclosures built one after another over a 150-year period from 1100 to 1250. It was an extraordinary task. Each wall required 15,000 to 20,000 logs, 1 foot in diameter and 20 feet tall. The timbers may have been covered with clay to protect against fire and the elements. Undoubtedly, the wall created an impressive deterrent. To a degree, the wall may have served as a social barrier, separating the elite insiders, the privileged class, and the leaders from those on the outside, the commoners. However, 3 telltale indicators lead archaeologists to believe that it was primarily a defensive structure. The great height of the palisade, the presence of evenly spaced bastions from where archers could shoot arrows, and finally, portions of the wall were built through residential areas, as if danger were imminent. For those trying to piece together the past, this brings up several questions. Was Cahokia, this unrivaled metropolis, this center of wealth and power, in danger from outside forces? Were other Indian peoples also organized on such a massive scale as to present a real threat to this powerful city? The very presence of the stockade indicates this may have been the case. Dr. John Kelly.
But shortly after Cahokia's initial peak, around 1150, there is the construction of a stockade in East St. Louis. This development coincides with the construction of the stockade here at Cahokia, the initial construction. And we see a similar thing being done at Mitchell. Now, whether this is coming from the people in the immediate area or what they perceive as threats beyond the American bottom is something that archaeologists haven't been able to determine.
Outside the stockade, west of Monk's Mound, stood another walled enclosure, referred to as the compound. The purpose of the compound is to this day unknown. Scattered throughout Cahokia were plazas, open expanses of parched clay, trampled to the consistency of concrete. Like shopping malls in America today, ancient America's craftsmen may have set up shop here. And this is where the day-to-day exchange of information and ideas would have taken place. By far the largest of these town squares was to be found in front of Monk's Mound. The central plaza probably had open-air markets clustered on the edge, and a field where the favorite game of chunky was often played. Archaeologists also discovered that much of the plaza area was intentionally filled and leveled to form the large flat expanse. Perhaps the most impressive feature of Cahokia is that this huge ancient metropolis was built entirely by hand. There were no beasts of burden as in the Old World, and amazingly, no Indian civilization developed the wheel. But even more amazing is the organization and sheer manpower necessary to build Cahokia. Thousands upon thousands of trees had to be chopped down with stone axes and transported miles by laborers just to create the stockade. In 1150, with an estimated population of some 20,000 people, Cahokia was one of the great urban centers of the world. It was larger than London and most other European cities at the time. In fact, it would not be until the year 1800 before another American city, Philadelphia, would surpass Cahokia's record. The orderly layout of Cahokia suggests that this was a planned city, in the shape of a diamond, with Monk's Mound at its center. The city measured 3 miles east to west and over 2 miles north to south. In all, a little more than 5 square miles. It was, however, a very crowded city, much more crowded than practically any American city of today. But, as in modern cities, people lived in neighborhoods, and the basis of neighborhood and community organization was the family. Members of several generations probably lived in a cluster of single-family dwellings. These neighborhoods bustled with outdoor activity, children playing, women grinding corn, and all the comings and goings of daily life. The only quiet time was in the dead of winter, when they lived and worked mostly indoors, patiently awaiting spring's return.
We return now to the book Hidden Cities, The Discovery and Laws of Ancient North American Civilization by Roger G. Kennedy. This book began with my discovery of the torch and sandal marks. They led me to learn as much as I could about the people who left them in that cave, and also by why only a few specialists seemed to be informed about them. What did the first European explorers and settlers know about ancient America? Why was that knowledge not passed on? Why was it not passed on, expanded, revised, and made a necessary prelude to American history? Is he snitching on himself? You were the director, bro. The antiquities of Mexico or of Egypt are far better known than those of Indiana, Illinois, or Ohio, and not because they are larger or more ambitious intellectually. Okay, he has a very strong point, and this is what I was saying earlier. There's a future video, and this is why we're getting into this right now. I want to show you guys how deep it goes, right? We go step by step. We're going to show all the correlation. Again, I got a future video on Ohio, Illinois, and Indiana, all these places, what they found in these caves, on the rivers, on the mounds, all that, because nobody has really done it. As he's saying here, this is director of the Smithsonian, director of the museum and everything. As I have learned, there is as much to say about your American lack of understanding of Indian history as there is to say about the Indians themselves. The first generation of Western colonizers had little to prepare them for the possibility of ancient cultures as they came into the upper reaches of the Ohio Valley between 1770 and 1810. Daniel Boone did not read Spanish, and he knew only what he had been learned of the West by the French and by the Charleston traders. Remember, Charleston, South Carolina, Huguenots who had traveled to the Mississippi before he came into Kentucky. The traders had come out of the Southern Carolinas, right? Traders, merchants, and reached the Mississippi, South Carolina, by routes which happened to bypass all the major mound centers. Though the French had been installed around Nashville for decades, in terrain full of ancient ruins, they did not provide forewarning of massive archaeology to their competitors from Carolina or Kentucky. They were mercantile folk, all right, businessmen. They didn't care about the mounds. These businessmen, who was these early pioneer businessmen, huh? Neither by training, inclination, nor the beguilements of leisure were they to be diverted from their goods and ledgers. None of these early merchants, like I said, they were calling them traders, and I told you they were really just merchants. Who were the merchants? Sephardic Jews, crypto Muslims. A lot of these people were the merchants, as they were telling you right here, especially when we're dealing with people from South Carolina. A lot of them are Huguenot, Moorish people, Sephardic Jews. They had the money, they had all the shops, all the trades, and it makes sense that, you know, as they went out, they were looking to make more money. They didn't really care about archaeology or, you know, preserving these mounds or studying them. So again, none of these early merchants was leisured, and none seems to have had the time for wonder. So from the 1680s until the 1770s, antiquity slumbered as commerce fretted and scratched overhead. Antiquity, it is true, had only recently gone to slumber as time was counted in the valley. It had been wide awake when in 1539 a Spanish expeditionary force led by Hernando de Soto hacked and burned its way through active mound building cultures from the Georgia Piedmont to the plains of Texas. All right, do you hear? Hernando de Soto, he's a Sephardic Moorish Jew, okay? And then he brought 600 soldiers. We have a book, we've read about that. 600 soldiers. And look what he was doing again, hacking and burning through all these mound building towns, cultures from Georgia to Texas. But antiquity was silent soon enough. The would-be conquistadors who emerged into the Appalachian Providence from Florida left a legacy. Though they did not establish colonies, their legacy was disease. After their microbes strong to accelerate the destruction already underway by those already loosed by sailors and slavers along the coast upon the Indians, all right? They weren't, who were they enslaving again? And what coast? Not the Guinea coast. Over here, right? Indians, remember, who did not have the appropriate antibodies. An unbroken Indian tradition of many centuries was removed from the scene. It had been destroyed not by force of arms. De Soto's entrada was a failure, but by the silent, insidious actions of European plagues. That's what they were bringing. De Soto was the first force of Europeans to enter the watershed of the Ohio, a region of the British later called the Western Waters. And Boone, even had been fluent in Spanish, would have learned little about what to expect in the West. The Spanish interest in its culture was limited to what pillage might be gotten from its temples and palaces. De Soto's study of its architecture did not go beyond determining the best means to storm its fortifications. So his chroniclers lavished little language upon accounts which might have forewarned the English or the French or Boone about the ancient buildings of the West. Not until the end of the 18th century did some Euro-Americans begin to show real curiosity in the history of their land and its peoples. Some of the seekers and invaders who entered under the flags of Spain and Great Britain were pinkish in skin tone. All right, listen to this. This is a major drop he's about to drop. Hold up. Are you guys ready? Because I know people will be thinking I just be making things up when I'm talking about these so-called black Europeans, right? So listen to what he says. It says, some of the seekers and invaders who entered under the flags of Spain and Great Britain, right? English and Spanish, right? Suppose, right? Were pinkish in skin tone. Others were brownish. Again, others were brownish or blackish, so-called blackish, blackish, brownish. Swarthy. Swarthy what? Spaniards, Great Britain, or English. Remember, a lot of these are the same people because they're just cryptos. They're the same people. Again, the director of the Smithsonian Institute, this guy knows a lot. A polymath, right? They call him a polymath. He's letting you know he knows the truth. We got others that are brownish or blackish, and I bet you there's a majority of brownish or blackish over the pinkish. Some were free, some slaves. Again, some were free, some slaves. That includes most likely the pinkish ones too. Don't just think the pinkish ones are the free ones. The pinkish ones could be the slaves. Some indentured servants or slaves for a term. The pinkish ones, masters or servants, discerned themselves as distinguished by skin color from the darker peoples among them. All right, he's told you right here. The pinkish ones, both servants and masters, discern themselves as distinguished by skin color from the darker peoples among them. All right, darker peoples among them. Who was coming over here? Not just white people or pinkish, as he's calling them. All right, again, the director of the Smithsonian Institute. Go complain to him. So they wanted to distinguish themselves from the darker people among them, whether slave or free. All right, darker people who were free, they weren't all slaves and they weren't Africans, and from the people already present in the valley. The races were then said to be white, black, and red. Though, of course, not a single person so described was or is, in fact, white, black, or red. Listen to what he's telling you right here. Crayon colors. The color scheme was artificial, but within it were categorized people of an infinite variety of colors. Infinite variety of colors. We're talking about Europeans. They didn't just come looking so-called white or pinkish. They had an infinite variety of colors. Okay? Rewards and penalties were meted out for no better reason than occupancy of one or another of those artificial categories. One of our primary themes will be how, in the valley, these people, newcomers, and those who had been there for thousands of years, played out their prejudices about each other. The occasions of grace. They had the benefit of a shock of discovery. In a few instances in human history has architecture been so important in altering the impressions of the nature of one people in the eyes of others. The founders had not anticipated that they would find in the West large, sophisticated, and ancient work performed by the kind of people still resident there. That architectural evidence was too obtrusive to be ignored. The new cities of the Central Valley, Cincinnati, St. Louis, Marietta, Portsmouth, Lexington, Pittsburgh, Natchez, and Nashville, had to be built by clearing away evidence of older ones. In the countryside, there were hundreds of thousands of earthen reminders of prior habitation. There still are tens of thousands. Listen to what he's telling you here. The shock of these discoveries forced upon the founders the possibility that Indians were not all savages. The founders knew nothing of ancient Africa outside of a little learning about Egypt. Had they known something of it at the time they were becoming acquainted with ancient America, they might have enlarged their sense of Negro possibility considerably farther, and by extension their apprehension of what other darker-skinned people, such as ancient Americans, again, dark-skinned people such as ancient Americans might have done, the sense of other Negro possibilities considerably farther, not just in Africa. Listen to what he's letting you know right here. All right, this is a major drop. What other darker skinned people, such as ancient Amarucans, dark skinned people, ancient Americans might have done, but they were neither so fortunate nor so bold. Nah, they didn't want to. We are so fortunate. Right now, we're fortunate. We're learning. Whoever's listening to this right now, again, this is the director of the Smithsonian. Listen to what he knew, right? Same people are the ones hiding all the stuff, right? All the art, what they finding. So maybe what he's doing is doing a confession while he's writing this, so he can have a clean heart, or so he can just feel like at least he tried to tell everybody. He just couldn't do it publicly, right? He had to write a book about it. He's letting you know, right, to think outside the box, okay, outside of Africa, of other darker skinned people, such as ancient Americans. We are so fortunate right now, though, to know this, and we may be so bold, okay? We have to be bold. Knowledge of the past may help alter the present. Listen to what he's saying. All right, he's making a confession.
15 miles southwest of Mound City lies the Sipe Mound, another Hopewell burial site now preserved in a public park. The remaining earthworks, as elsewhere, are only a small part of the original 27-acre site first mapped by Squire and Davis a century and a half ago. The floor plan of both dwellings and charnel houses, evidenced by original post-hole discolorations, is the same as at Mound City. This detailed stone head was found in the central burial mound, an elongated rectangle of earth which may also have been the focus of Sipe's ceremonial life. It may also have been the site of the chief's residence, with a view of the surrounding plains in all directions. Another 20 miles southwest, just 50 miles east of Cincinnati, lies Serpent Mound, one of the most spectacular effigy monuments in the world. This is an Adena creation in the shape of a striking snake, a quarter of a mile long. A tree now grows in the open jaws of the serpent. At the other end is the coiled tail. A steel tower now allows visitors to see the snake's figure from above. We know the serpent is Adena rather than Hopewell because of the type, size, and dating of nearby dwelling and burial sites. We do not know if it was intended as a totem of the particular people who built it or as a religious symbol. To many ancient societies, serpents represented eternal life because of their ability to shed their skins and begin life anew.
The book is called The Mound Builders, Their Works and Relics by Stephen D. Peet, PhD, 1892. All right, we are to begin with the Paleolithic Age. It is now acknowledged that there was a Paleolithic Age in America as well as in Europe. All right, there was Paleolithic people over here. That means old, paleo, old, very old. All right. All right, so real quick, I'm in online etymology dictionary just in case, paleo. What does paleo mean again? So there was Paleo Indians or Paleo people, right, in America, just like in Europe, you're saying. So what does it mean? All right. So it says meaning ancient, very ancient, early, prehistoric, primitive people, prehistoric, ancient, early people, fossil, from Latinized form of Greek palaios, meaning old, ancient, from palai, long ago, far back. All right, there was people here from long ago, from far back. Paleo, from very far back. All right, from very, very far back, long ago. We ain't talking about just 10,000 years ago. We're talking about really far back. All right. from Peru, far in space of time, very far, far, man, not near, far. All right, continuing. Now he's talking about the Mississippi Valley and why they would probably, he was just talking about, how it's built there, the geography and everything, the land, how many products and animals and different places and terrain. He's saying right here, a river system which for thousands of miles drained the interior, furnished the channels for communication, and was evidently well understood by this people. A vast sedimentary basin through which the rivers have worn deep channels, leaving tablelands cut by thousands of ravines and presenting bluffs, headlands, high hills, narrow isthmuses, detached island-like cliffs, in some cases precipitous and difficult of access, furnished by many places on which these people could build their defenses, covering them with complicated works resembling the citadels of the old world, beneath which they could place their villages and dwell in safety. All right. So look at that geography. You got that geography over there in Egypt today? Saw that geography? I mean, wow, man, right? They resemble the citadels of the old world, all right? They build defenses. They use these ridges and they build their own, right? It says the number of these ancient villages is well calculated to excite surprise. 10,000 burial mounds or tombs were found in the single state of Ohio, just in Ohio. All right? What are we talking about? Mounds, just in Ohio. Just in Ohio, I'm telling you. There's a lot of origin stories coming out of Ohio. A lot of tribes originated there or came out of there. All right? We're going to dig into that. All right, so 10,000 burial mounds or tombs were found in Ohio, and also 1,000 or 1,500 enclosures in the same state. Nor is their magnitude less a matter of surprise than their number. All right, their magnitude. It's not even just that there's a lot of them, it's their magnitude too, how they were built. 20 miles of embankment constitute one series of works. 20 miles of embankment? 20 miles. Can you even picture that? Can you picture building a mound, like a wall, like for 20 miles long? That's a lot of work. All right. Walls sometimes 30 feet in height. Walls sometimes 30 feet in height and enclosing from 50 to 400 acres. Surrounding their fortifications. All right. Man, huge walls, right? They used to build huge 30 feet high in the man. 20 miles embankments and 30 feet walls. All right. These are not savages, enclosing from 50 to 400 acres, surrounding their fortifications. Pyramids 100 feet in height, covering 16 acres of ground. 16 acres of pyramids. All right. 16 acres of pyramids. All right. We're reading a primary source here. All right. Divided into wide terraces, 300 feet long and 50 feet wide, vying with the pyramids of Egypt. All right, vying. All right, so he said vying with the pyramids of Egypt. So what does vying mean? We're in the Cambridge Dictionary, and it says it's the present particle of vie, V-I-E. So let's go to that. All right, so it says vie. All right, to compete with other people to achieve or get something. To achieve, you compete. They compete with the pyramids of Egypt. All right, they compete with the pyramids of Egypt. All right, vying with the pyramids of Egypt, form the foundations for their great houses. All right, mounds form their lookout stations, 60 and 90 feet in height. The variety of their works was great, and their distribution widespread. In one part of this wide domain, there were game drives, in which the animals hunted were erected in effigy. In another part were garden beds, covering hundreds of acres, and presenting many curious patterns. In another, large groups and lines of burial mounds. In another, many circles and fort rings. In another, lodge circles and hut rings. In another, village circles and dance rings, interspersed with temple platforms. You hear all this building and engineering. All right, how there was these layouts, how they had these whole towns and cities, metropolises. All right, in this area, the Mississippi Valley. and all around these mountains. So it's not just that you find one little mountain here. It's like a whole complex, town, city, like how they were building everything. In another, extensive enclosures with domiciliary platforms, in another groups of pyramids, in another groups of pyramids, interspersed with fish ponds, surrounded by earth walls, fish ponds that were growing fish around their pyramids. You hear this? Surrounded by earth walls. Everywhere was manifest a wonderful adaptation of the works to the soil and scenery and physical surroundings. Can you imagine just seeing that? Man, sometimes I wish was able to see that, like experience that, like just see that. Wow, man, just live in those times and just see that. All right? That sounds like people living in a golden age, right? So they were able to like use the nature around them, the geology around them and everything. Physical surroundings. Different grades of advancement were exhibited, but at the same time, great activity and great skill in gaining subsistence. All right, every spot was well chosen and the works placed upon it were best adapted to the locality. All right, science, high civilization, high science. All right.
Cahokia, as a city, did not exist in complete isolation. It was part of a society which extended far beyond its urban boundaries. Just as in our own society, Cahokia had sizable suburbs, regional centers, and farming communities which helped support it.
Each one of these centers has its own unique history and how it related to Cahokia. Some of them, such as St. Louis, unfortunately was destroyed before archaeologists could carefully study it. So we know very little about it except for the maps that were made during the 19th century. Very early on at Cahokia's peak, which occurred probably around 1100 AD, we see a lot of settlements located very low on the floodplain. As we go through time, we find that these settlements move higher and higher up onto the floodplain locations, and then we see settlements disperse into the uplands after Cahokia's peak.
Other temple towns existed throughout Mississippian culture and were scattered over the Mississippi and Ohio River valleys and into the southeast. They boasted populations in the hundreds or possibly thousands. Usually, several mounds surrounded a plaza. Many of these communities also served as regional centers for trade and commerce. But throughout it all, there was only one Cahokia. This densely populated city was the great capital of politics, religion, commerce, and art. It was unique among all Mississippian communities. Were all of these communities linked, part of a grand prehistoric Indian nation with Cahokia as its capital? Or were they separate and independent, simply trading goods and ideas? There is no doubt that Cahokia was a cohesive, organized society. None of these grand monuments could have been built any other way. Nor could they have been built without well-tended fields, capable of feeding a population in the tens of thousands. Agriculture was the key to it all. To feed this population required massive amounts of corn on a daily basis. While they raised several varieties of corn, they also cultivated squash, pumpkins, sunflowers, and other plants. A typical meal at Cahokia most likely consisted of corn, served in a variety of ways, some meat, and a portion of vegetable stew made primarily of squash, nuts, and pumpkin, and seasoned with salt and herbs. Those of higher status probably had more meat in their diet. Ironically, their great success with corn had long-term negative effects. Enormous population growth, nurtured by stable corn crops, eventually led to the depletion of the soil, as well as other vital natural resources. And their nutritionally unbalanced diet, too high in carbohydrates, too low in protein, caused malnourishment and chronic illness. Contagious diseases became more common.
Yet, despite its obvious disadvantages, Cahokia was undoubtedly a magnet in the same way as cities are today. There was an elaborate hierarchy here that gave life a rigid structure and direction. The supreme power of the chief emanated from a belief in his divine affiliation with the sun god and the resulting control he wielded over food surpluses. His priestly advisors were an elite class that directed community leaders and the heads of family clans to design and supervise agricultural and building projects. Commoners toiled in the fields and in the borrow pits, and manufactured the goods needed to support the lifestyle of the ruling class and society at large. Status, gender, age, and kinship all determined each person's precise role in life. As in many cultures, men and women had distinctly different roles. Men made tools, hunted, and fished, while women carried out all domestic and child-rearing duties, cultivated crops, and made pottery and clothing. Those of higher status were probably less burdened.
We return now to the book Hidden Cities, The Discovery and Laws of Ancient North American Civilization by Roger G. Kennedy. We're in chapter 1 now, the book Hidden Cities. The founders of American architecture, the cultures that nourished them, and the Great Dying. The architecture of the Mississippi watershed is as old as that of Egypt. Say, what? Okay. As old as Egypt, or even older, we're going to see. Okay. Especially in Ohio and Louisiana and all these areas, they have places that are way older than ancient Egypt. But it's as old, at least, as Egypt. So where's the real Egypt? If we're talking about as old, though composed of other materials than the sandstone of the pyramids, the monuments of the Mississippi are as large in size and as regular in shape. Indeed, one of the most noteworthy qualities of ancient American architecture is that some of its forms were so regular that they were replicated precisely in locations many miles apart. The first very large buildings created in North America were constructed about 6,000 years ago. Most were made by moving earths in baskets woven of vegetable fibers. These baskets used throughout the valley for architectural work were as large as the wagons, wicker packsacks. Many 19th and early 20th century Americans carried on canoe trips. Some of us can still recall how heavy they were when filled. Several million baskets were filled with heavy clay for the construction of each of many structures in West Virginia, Louisiana, and Illinois. Despite so much exertion, the eroded contours of these monuments are not today very impressive. After thousands of winters, plows and pot hunters have done their work upon them, they sometimes appear to be little more than discouraged hillocks, about the shape of a rain-drenched haystack. A few, however, remain very grand indeed. Careful cross-sectional archaeology reveals the layering within these ambiguous shapes: brown earth and often red clay, earth again, perhaps one or two more tiers or lenses of red-black charred remains of buildings, ritually fired, we may assume, and still more earth, some of it so densely compacted that the fibrous markings of the baskets are still stamped upon it. The Spanish and French who first saw these hillocks found it difficult to believe them to be the deliberate creations of mankind. They were so much larger than any work or architecture known to them. The entire facade of the Palace of the Louvre in Paris can fit easily within the space surrounded by D-shaped earthen rings at Poverty Point, Louisiana. Built at the same time as Stonehenge, all right? That's how old Louisiana is. Stonehenge is debatable. That might have been built in 1900s. The Papal Basilica of St. Peter in Rome, complete with its plaza and gardens, could be placed within the circular embankment of Watson Break, which is probably at least 1,000 years older than Poverty Point. Oh, that's old. Watson Break, huh? All right, so let me just show you guys Watson break. All right, here's a little drawing of it. I just want to show you how old this is. Watson Break is an archaeological site in present-day Wichita Parish, Louisiana, from the Archaic period, dated to about 5,400 years ago. That's from their carbon dating, so it could be even older. Watson Break is considered the oldest earthwork mound complex in North America. So the sources here. It is older than the ancient Egyptian pyramids. Older, all right, than Egypt. Older. You got people building mounds, right? Way before ancient Egypt, right? How do you have time to build mounds and settle down? You got to have an advanced agricultural civilization where you don't have to be out all the time trying to survive, hunt, and not get killed. Where you can build mounds and practice religious ceremonies or do whatever they like in their free time. Creating mounds, that's a science. This is way before Egypt. Wake up. Wake up.
We know the Adena people were not ignorant savages from the timeless voice of their art, brought to light primarily through the efforts of Frederick Ward Putnam of Harvard's Peabody Museum, spurred by his competition with John Wesley Powell of the newly created Smithsonian Institution. Early drawings of the serpent, now repeatedly excavated and repaired, differ widely from each other. The figure was created by laying down a pattern of loose rock, which was then covered with a mound of sand and finally with earth and clay. Pottery played a large role in Adena life. As did tobacco and the manufacture of pipes. Then, as later, the Native Americans are thought to have believed in smoke as a connection to the spirit world, using it in treating illness as well as to induce visions. Their weapons and tools were finely crafted. Burials at some distance from the serpent itself followed the classic Adena style, occurring in family or clan groups, or in the successive lineage of head men over generations. Each burial had its own mound, layered above or beside earlier interments. And dominating the landscape, accurately following the contours of this actual snake skeleton, lay the serpent mound, an important force in everyday life for the Adena, and an intriguing mystery today.
As important as the buildings, monuments, and artifacts that we see as defining a culture are the things we cannot see, their beliefs. Beliefs and symbols gave life meaning and purpose, and explained the grand scheme of existence. Thomas Emerson.
Very typically, we think of archaeologists as studying arrowheads and bones and garbage and reconstructing the economic life of people. But with symbolism, we have the one chance to possibly get into the minds of prehistoric peoples.
The Mississippians recognized a natural order to the universe and attempted to live in harmony with it. Their world was one of opposing forces, dark and light, order and anarchy, good and evil.
One of the things that's very clear to us at Cahokia is that the upper classes are using the symbolism to manipulate the activities of the lower classes. One of the really highly unusual aspects of Cahokia symbolism is this extreme focus on fertility. Virtually all of the pottery decorations and the stone figurines that we have recovered are tied to the idea of agricultural fertility. This is very unusual in the eastern United States, where warfare is generally depicted in the symbolism.
The Cahokian belief in an afterlife moved them to bury their honored dead with elaborate ritual and the lavish trappings of the life they had led. The dramatic extent of this came to light in the excavation of a small, obscure mound, Mound 72. Just 6 feet high, this ridgetop mound was overlooked on many early maps of the area. But later archaeologists who plotted it were intrigued by its unique diagonal axis and position, unlike the usual east to west or north to south placement. After years of investigations, Mound 72 yielded tens of thousands of artifacts and the remains of 270 burials. Among the burials was an early leader, resting on a blanket of 20,000 shell beads. Around him were 6 attendants, and nearby caches of mica, rolled sheet copper, and more than 800 perfect chert projectile points. Nearby, a deep pit held the remains of 53 young women, arranged in 2 rows and buried 3 deep, perhaps the victims of sacrifice. Mounds were places where the Mississippians entombed people of high status. Most of the population at Cahokia were buried in cemeteries, not mounds. Like many other ancient cultures, the full extent of Cahokian beliefs remains a mystery. They had no written language or records, and our knowledge of them is acquired in bits and pieces. We assume that Cahokians enjoyed music, song, and dance, and based on observations of historic tribes, they regularly engaged in games of chance and skill. Music was created through the use of rattles, drums, and flute-like instruments or whistles. Dancing was probably symbolic. For instance, a weaving line of people mimicking a snake in a fertility ritual. They played shell-guessing games and gambled with dice. Like Native Americans in the Southeast, they may have also played a stick and ball game similar to lacrosse. But the premier sport at Cahokia was chunky. In a way, it was their national pastime. Players threw javelins at a rolling concave stone, attempting to mark the place where it would come to a stop. Chunky engaged the entire community, from its youngest members, who apparently played with miniature chunky stones, to its leaders, who were buried with the puck-like objects. Betting on the game was common, and matches may have continued throughout the day. Apparently, tattooing and body painting were used by both Mississippian men and women to enhance beauty and indicate social standing. The tangible signs of wealth and power can also be seen in the great number of artifacts not native to this area. Following established trade routes, Cahokians either traveled by foot or canoed vast distances in all directions, acquiring such things as copper from the upper Great Lakes, mica from the southern Appalachians, and seashells from both the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic seaboard. Well-crafted tools and food surpluses were traded for other highly prized raw materials. Copper from the north was shaped into implements, but most often hammered into sheets from which effigies and ornaments were cut. Through their extensive trade networks, the Cahokians imported tens of thousands of exotic marine shells used for ornamentation, including the whelk, conch, and marginella. Galena, ochre, and hematite from southeastern Missouri were ground into paint pigments. Quartz and fluorite from as far away as Tennessee were used for ornamentation and ceremonial projectile points. They cut beads and other objects of adornment from Appalachian mica, Ozark bauxite, fire clay, and numerous rocks and minerals were carved into animal and human effigies. Many items were manufactured for ritual purposes only and were buried with people of high status for use in the next world.
We return now to the book Hidden Cities, The Discovery and Laws of Ancient North American Civilization by Roger G. Kennedy. All right, so back in the book, that's what they were talking about. Watson break. All right, the Papal Basilica can fit inside that. That's how big it is, man. That's how big that place is, which is almost 6,000 years ago. Now listen to this. The Mayan calendar opens with a mythic date of 3,372 BC. So that's before even Sumerian and Egyptian history. By that time, the people of the Mississippi Valley, by that time though, even though the Maya started there, by that time, the people from the Mississippi Valley were already creating monumental architecture before anything so ambitious had been built in Mexico, Central or South America. Earthen buildings were arranged in strict and repeated geometric patterns along the bayous and channels in what are now the states of Louisiana and Mississippi. In the Mississippi Delta, two of the earliest complexes, which can be dated with much precision, lie near Monroe, Louisiana. The Hedgepeth Mounds are on the Bayou d'Arbonne, about 20 miles to the northwest, and probably were built around 4,500 BC. All right, these ain't savages, advanced civilizations over here. Above Frenchman's Bend on the Bayou Bartholomew, 15 miles northeast of Monroe, are a row of mounds whose carbon dates establish them as about 1,000 years younger. That's 3,500 BC. On the campus of Louisiana State University at Baton Rouge is the most ancient evidence of the propensity of humans for architecture to be found so conveniently to learning anywhere in the world. Two conical mounds, the larger about 130 feet in diameter and 16 feet high, the rich organic soil of which was put in place about 3,000 BC, rich fertile soil, right? What is that? Kemet, rich black fertile soil. Kemet, rich fertile black soil, was put in place about 3000 BC. 6 miles north at Monte Sano, two even earlier conical mounds were destroyed in 1967. They included platforms probably used for cremation and a structure built on posts about 20 feet square, which may well have been the oldest wooden building of which the plans are clear. They destroyed this stuff. They destroyed the evidence of the true old world. They destroyed this stuff. A close approximation of what such plans might have been can be derived from the Montesano post molds, where the posts have decayed, leaving spaces subsequently filled by earth compacted differently from its surroundings. What a treasure! And it was protected by the compassionate earth until people of our generation saw fit to destroy it. They destroyed it. This is the director of the Smithsonian Institute and American Museum. Okay? He's snitching. He's confessing. The story of the 5,000-year-old mounds at Frenchman's Bend is, so far, happier. A remarkably sympathetic developer recently agreed that its principal building will not become the 7th tee of a golf course. All right, that's a big one. A lot of these mounds, where the mounds were, they made golf courses out of them. I recall poignantly the day that concession was made and how proudly he drove away in his Land Rover, more worthy of the best Abercrombie and Fitch could provide than any competitor in the Mississippi Valley. 5 mounds are still discernible along the edge of the fairway. You hear this? The largest, a low, haystack-shaped cone about 130 feet in diameter and 10 feet high. It's a golf course now. The relationship of the 5 to each other appears erratic, but appearances may not disclose lunar or solar alignments, or some other order and principle we do not yet understand. About 5,000 years ago, monumental American architecture began to be created in circular or half-circular, D-shaped forms, the largest of which are so striking that they justify calling the ensuing 3 millennia in American architectural history the Age of the Rings.
Time and the elements have, for the most part, destroyed all traces of clothing, baskets, animal skins, and other fragile items. Yet miraculously, some of their extremely fine woven cloth has remained, preserved by copper salts or charred by fire. Fortunately, artifacts fashioned from stone, bone, shell, and pottery have survived the centuries, either whole or in fragments, and help to explain Mississippian life. Like sandpaper or a file, sandstone served as an abrasive. It was also used in the production of figurines and incised tablets, such as the Birdman tablet. But one tool changed their lives. Manufactured from chert, large hoes made corn cultivation efficient. And without efficient agriculture, Cahokia could not have developed. The most abundant artifacts found are the fragile remains of pottery, mostly made from local clays and formed through the coiling process. Over the years, Cahokian pottery became more refined and artistic. Ornaments, engraved beakers and bowls, and effigy figures all may have been used for special occasions. They also made large, thick-walled pans for salt production, and stumpware, whose tree stump-shaped legs were probably used to support pots over fires. For centuries, forests around Cahokia were sources for the tremendous quantities of wood essential to life here.
They would have to have wood every day for firewood, for thousands of people for hundreds of years. Each house you build takes around 100 trees. The stockade wall that went around the center of the site here, almost 2 miles long, was built 4 times, and each construction took around 20,000 trees. So when you start adding all that up, you start realizing they were depleting the resources of the forest in the area.
Deforestation probably was a contributing factor to Cahokia's eventual demise. The Mississippians made full use of the animals they hunted. Turtle shells became bowls and combs. Feathers were used in necklaces, headdresses, and capes. Skins were used for clothing, bags, and blankets. By far the most important animal was the white-tailed deer. Besides being the major source of meat, antlers and bones were used for arrow points, tools, and ceremonial headdresses. The inner bark of the cedar tree was made into fine baskets and fabrics. Weavers spun animal hair and silky fibers from plants into thread, which they then finger wove into sashes and other fabrics. Rawhide, incredibly strong, was used to lash tools to handles and braided to make bowstrings. Cahokians had managed to build a true civilization based on corn and a simple digging tool, the hoe. They embroidered the civilization with art and a wealth of trade items. Yet even while they continued to build their earthen monuments, it was the beginning of the end. In the 1200s, at the same time the Crusades were ending in Europe, the decline and eventual abandonment of Cahokia began. To date, no sign of epidemic, invasion, or natural disaster has been uncovered. Why, then, did these people of unparalleled wealth and power move away? Strangely, Cahokia's very success is probably what led to its downfall.
The theories about the decline of Cahokia are variable. They range from such things as disease or social conflict, warfare with other groups. One of the most crucial ones, though, was the depletion of resources in the area. And just the need they had for wood alone was probably out sort of staggering, I guess you'd say. Okay. When you start cutting down the forest, you're also cutting down the habitat of animals you hunt for food. You have to keep going further out to get these things that you need, and you're competing more than with other people for those same resources. So we see increased, conflict. And then sometime after 1200 AD, there were some climatic changes, and perhaps the shifting of the rainy season from the growing season. The people themselves may have not noticed these changes, but the plants react to these. And you start having shortages of food and resources, and you start having more social, internal conflict or problems, and perhaps the system is breaking down.
This huge city overexploited the natural resources around it. Because agriculture was so successful, it led to overpopulation, pollution, poor sanitation, and an increase in contagious diseases. A gradually cooling climate affected food production. Surpluses declined. Cahokia's political and economic control waned. Disillusioned and dwindling masses likely rebelled, but there is no clear evidence of warfare. This ancient metropolis simply faded away as its people slowly left. By the year 1400, it was all over. What became of these people is unknown. We can only guess at who their descendants might be. Today, Cahokia and its suburbs hold many mysteries, the subjects of scientific investigations to come. The ancient Mississippians built a nation long before the United States became a nation. They developed a civilization long before the arrival of European civilization. For centuries, Cahokia was the undisputed center of the Mississippian culture. But like the Mayans, Romans, and Egyptians before them, they eventually collapsed beneath the weight of their own society. What secrets did they take with them, these amazing people who carved a vibrant city out of a vast wilderness? To this day, only 1% of Cahokia has been excavated. What secrets will tomorrow reveal about this ancient metropolis, Cahokia?
10 miles south of Dayton stands another Adena ruin, the Miamisburg Mound. Believed to have been built more than 2,000 years ago, one of the earliest of many mounds once scattered over the area. As at the Serpent Mound, there are no outlying earthworks and no perimeter wall. The conical Miamisburg Mound, the largest in Ohio, stands 68 feet high and is 300 feet in diameter. The Adena people who erected it lived in small villages nearby, made thick-walled pottery, and domesticated a number of plants for food. Excavation of the mound in 1860 revealed its purpose as an elite tomb. An adult male burial was found at a depth of 8 feet from the apex of the mound. Layers of sand, stone, and earth imply that the mound was built in many stages over a long period of time, perhaps each stage covering the remains of a respected leader. The latest major Hopewell site, Fort Ancient, stands on a bluff above the Little Miami River, 30 miles northeast of Cincinnati. For many years, Fort Ancient was considered a defensive structure because of its walled hilltop enclosures covering more than 100 acres within 3.5 miles of earthen and stone walls. Recently, archaeologists have determined Fort Ancient to have been a major center of social, economic, and religious functions. Today, roads cut through the walled enclosures, and trails may be followed on foot around the entire site. Recent research indicates the Hopewell laid out the earthworks precisely to align with movements of the sun, moon, and Venus as guides in planting and harvest and in associated religious practices. Hopewell tools, weapons, and pottery have been recovered from the patient earth, exhibiting a high degree of craft. From evidence in the soil, their homes and villages have been recreated in miniature. It is their burial practices, however, which speak to us most clearly. Their desire to preserve the bones or ashes of their dead has given us the clearest view of one aspect of the mound builder's life. As time passes, we are able, little by little, to enlarge our vision and to see the Hopewell and the Adena as real people, as doers and dreamers, as early shapers and sharers of our common humanity.